It's not normally my thing to tell people what they should or shouldn't read, but today I am here on a solemn mission to convince you that everyone should read Chain Gang All Stars. Hello, friends and enemies! Welcome to Horror and Inconvenience, where things are usually spooky and always weird. It's been a while. You may be wondering why. It's because I had bronchitis, and so I wasn't really in a position to sit in front of a camera and talk a bunch. In fact, the cuts are a little bit jumpier than usual today, and I know my normal style isn't exactly smooth sailing. It's probably because I had to stop to cough. So, just a tiny bit of housekeeping first. I always try to keep this stuff brief. I'm trying to make a couple of small changes to my channel and settle on something a little bit more consistent in terms of the style of videos that I put out and how often and all of that. So now is a great time if you have anything you want to see or want to see less of on this channel to let me know. Give me as much feedback as you like. Try to be nice. I am a fragile little flower, but I do actually want some feedback. So, yeah, let me know because I am currently in the process of figuring out my next steps. And in case you're wondering, this is my Criminali channel merch. When Ollie announced that he had merch and I saw the James Patterson Depreciation Society shirt, I rushed to buy one so fast that he had not yet realized that there was a typo in his design and corrected it. So now I have a one-of-a-kind James Patterson Depreciation Society shirt. I'm very proud of it. I love Ollie's channel, and it's so much fun to support an internet friend. Okay, now that that's all out of the way, I am here today on a solemn mission to convince you that Chain Gang All Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah is the book everyone should read this year, and also in future years. So this is a book that is coming out in the first week of May. I got an advance copy, blah, 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 bookseller, blah, blah, blah. Adjei-Brenyah is the author of Friday Black, a short story collection that came out a couple of years ago and made a huge splash. I've only read one of the stories from Friday Black so far. It was in the 2018 Year's Best Fantasy and Sci-Fi Short Stories. And that story was Through the Flash, which is a sort of dark take on the time loop story, and it is absolutely beautiful. I have actually purchased Friday Black and plan to read the rest of the stories soon. Very excited about it because Chain Gang All Stars blew my mind. It is so good. So, fundamentally, when looking at this book, there are two types of people. There's the type of person who sees the title Chain Gang All Stars and is instantly sold. And then there's the type of person who isn't. Obviously, if you recognize this title for the great, great title that it is, I don't have to worry about it. I know you're going to read it. But what I'm doing here is I'm going to continue describing the book until I have winnowed out any possible objection or excuse someone could have not to read it. This is very important to me. So, if the title and excellent cover design haven't immediately sold you, we'll start with a brief summary. Chain Gang All Stars is a near-future dystopia set in the United States, wherein people with death row prison sentences or prison sentences exceeding, I think, 25 years have the option, instead of serving their sentences or being executed, to sign up for a gladiatorial combat program, essentially. They duel other prisoners to the death, and in between death matches, they exist as a sort of full-time reality show. The book follows a broad cast of characters, but at the center are a couple, two of the most successful, two of the most still alive gladiators. They're called links in this book, like links on a chain gang. And that would be Loretta Thurwar and Hurricane Stax. Her real name's Hamara Stacker. Doesn't matter. You'll find that out when you read the book, which you're definitely going to do. It's set during the last 2 weeks of Thurwar's tenure on the chain gang. If you survive 3 years on the chain gang, you will be freed. And Thurwar is very close to that. In terms of the protagonist especially, that makes this a very tight, nail-biting page-turner of a read as you race through her last stretch on the chain gang to see if she's going to survive. So from a plot perspective, that's a no-brainer. It's unputdownable. If deathmatch dystopia with black lesbian protagonists somehow isn't enough for you, let's address any other possible reasons you may need to read this book. If you like dystopian fiction, and especially if you've read so much of it that you've become a little bit jaded and tend to be more discerning about it, if you need stronger world building or a more direct social critique in your dystopia, if nothing really scratches that itch for you, let me tell you that this is the apotheosis of dystopian fiction. The general agreement seems to be among readers that the purpose of a dystopia is to magnify what's already present in society in order to make it more visible to the reader. Think the way that Orwell showed the workings of the nascent surveillance state in 1984, or the way that Brave New World shows how fascism and authoritarianism can creep in by distracting a populace. Those are basic examples. As a dystopia with that stated purpose, this book could not be more effective. Everything that happens in this story is entirely terrifyingly plausible. It's bigger, it's exaggerated, but it's not beyond the pale. The brilliance of this book as a dystopia is that it takes the next logical steps in a slew of already horrific things that are happening in the carceral state. Mass incarceration, the death penalty, the absolute inaccessibility of reform or restorative justice in the current system, the fact that prisoners are legally enslaved, and the fact that it all happens for profit. All of this is magnified, but in proportion. So it's bigger so that we can see it, but it's everything that's already present. I don't know if you know this, but America is really, really racist. That is something that Adjei-Brenyah does not let you forget for 1 minute. Because if he's not allowed to forget it, well, why should we be? Okay, so if you think that this premise sounds a little bit too science fiction-y for you, if you're really more of a literary fiction reader, why are you watching my channel? But hello, welcome, stay. Just let me have a moment to praise Adjei-Brenyah's craft as a writer. Adjei-Brenyah is incisive and efficient with his writing, but also adventurous in ways that really pay off. There is a slight experimental edge to the writing in this novel. It's easy to follow. It's not so experimental that you find yourself unmoored, but for instance, there are changes in point of view in the writing. There are uses of footnotes that are both fictional and non-fictional in concert with each other. Just a variety of styles to give the impression of a variety of perspectives on a story that really, really expands the tapestry and shows you a world only a little bit off from ours in a way that is so absorbing and moving. His character development is... Listen, I am so jealous of this man's talent. It very much fulfills the expectations a lot of literary fiction readers have of character-driven story. Despite the fact that it's high concept and has a propulsive plot, it really is the story of the characters. And there are a lot of characters. There is a protagonist, which is Loretta Thurwar. She and her partner, Hamara, are, I think, the most richly drawn characters in this story. They really are the heart of it. But all of the characters feel like people. They all get their due. And they're all complex. They all feel like people you could meet. Most of them elicit sympathy. All of them have flaws. They're touching because you believe them wholly from the first moment. I mean, if you're a literary fiction reader, you're reading for good characterization, beautiful and efficient writing. You're gonna find it here. Now, if you find literary fiction to be generally dull and you prefer genre fiction, you like the way that it distorts and magnifies ideas, you like the way that it builds alternate worlds that you can either escape to, or in the case of something like Chain Gang All-Stars, be grateful that you're not part of, then it's got something for the sci-fi or even horror reader as well. I've alluded before to the fact that Adjei-Brenyah really paints a broad picture of this society. I think that there is a lot to say about world building in this novel. As much as a dystopia does draw from what's already present, there's a huge and cohesive feat of imagination at work here. There are science fictional technologies with fascinating implications. There are extrapolations on the rules of this world and how it would affect the formation of its people. Really, everything that you're looking for from science fiction in terms of exploring the implications of an alternate society and seeing a world where things work a little bit differently, you're going to get that here. If you're into horror, well, all of the characters are in a terrible situation the entire time, and there's a lot of violence as well as existential horror, and it also explores the darker reaches of human experience emotionally, which I know is one of the draws of horror for a lot of fans. When a when a situation is so beyond grim, is so ghastly, how does the human mind function? And that's something that, with the strength of his characterization, Adjei-Brenyah is really adept at delving into. That said, there is also a satirical edge to this book that makes it possible to read without just wanting to lay down and die. There are moments of humor, and the joke is always on the cruelty of the system and the people who perpetuate that cruelty. This story really is the definition of punching up. If you like nonfiction, or you like your writing that you read to have a political edge to it, you are also going to find a lot to draw from here. Even though it is very much a fictional story, there are moments where it reads sort of as an imaginative essay. The book is graced with one of my favorite literary features, footnotes. And, well, some of the footnotes are in-story fictional footnotes. They expand the world building and the characterization. There are also footnotes that refer to current United States statutes, current situations in the United States, real prisoners that have been through real similar situations to the ones that some of the prisoners in this book are shown in. And between these footnotes and the story they comment on, there's an implied essay. God, it's so good. Adjei-Brenyah has managed to create an absorbing science fiction story that has its manifesto between the lines. It's rewarding to the nonfiction reader because it lays out the facts and comments on them, which is what good nonfiction pretty much always does. And there's so much to engage with here for the reader of reporting, history, social sciences, political writing. In fact, I think a regular nonfiction reader has a kind of mandate to engage with this work and works like it. But okay. Maybe you're wary of political writing. If you are marginalized, maybe you feel that having your situation discussed over and over again can be draining and depressing. The thing is that this book isn't just speaking to a reader who might not be able to see the system. You know, it's not just making oppression in American society visible. It's also speaking to people to whom it's been visible the whole time. You know, the author is Black, and I think there are elements of this book that would speak to a Black reader that I simply can't comment on. I'm probably missing some things, and I'm really looking forward to when it's out and it's read a little more widely and I can get some own voices reviews from that corner. But I know as a queer woman, the depth and complexity of the primary relationship depicted in the story, which is a romantic relationship between two Black women, it meant a lot to me. Spoke to something that I wanted to see represented more in stories about the complexity and it's odd to say, but the adultness of queer relationships. The fact that queer people aren't necessarily in a perpetual adolescence and become fully realized adults with fully realized adult relationships. That as much as adolescence and discovery mean very different things to queer people, that's not the only story that we have. just seeing complex adult characters in a queer relationship was, well, it's rare, honestly, especially when it comes to queer women. Um, and I think it really speaks to the author's vast capacity for empathy that he was able to portray such a broad variety of identities with so much depth. If you care at all about reading widely and experiencing diverse stories, then this is a story that you should feel compelled to look into. Finally, if somehow none of this has caught your interest, let me just say, this book is going to matter so much. If you like to talk about books, you need to read this book. This book is important. It's going to be central to the conversation for a while, I think. And if it isn't right away, then I think people who have read it are going to push to make it so. I think it's going to win a lot of awards. I think it's going to change a lot of minds and hearts. And I think that in terms of craft, it's going to be held up as an example. And yeah, if you're involved at all in the conversation about books, then this is a book you need to get involved with. Chain Gang All-Stars is one of the best books I've ever read. I can't wait for it to come out and be widely read by other people. And yeah, read it or I will cry. Okay, so I'm working on this new thing where whenever I talk about a book, I talk about other books that are connected to it for me in some way. I haven't come up with a name for this segment or what it is yet, so if you have any ideas, please do share. The first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about connected readings is something that I also happen to be reading at the same time, which is Pet by Awaeke Emezi, because this is also a novel about restorative justice. Where Chain Gang All-Stars delves into why we need it, Pet delves into how it could happen and what its consequences would be. So since I happened to be reading it at the same time, it was on my mind a lot during the reading experience. I'm not finished with it yet, but I love it so far. As far as what this book immediately made me want to pick up next, and I do plan to read in the near future, Abolition Geography by Ruth Wilson Gilmore is a book of essays about the carceral state and prison abolition, why we need it, what it is, its possibilities and complications. Ruth Wilson Gilmore is cited several times in Chain Gang All-Stars, and the epigraph at the beginning is from her work. And she's been on my list for a long time, so I am looking forward to digging in. This is merely an associative thing, this next reading. It's just something that popped into my mind a lot due to the images in the book, and that is the story of John Henry from African American folklore. This beautiful annotated African American folk tales is something that I picked up this year, although I'd had my eye on it for ages and ages. I'm a big folklore nut. Everything I read makes me think of a folktale or fairy tale or ballad or something along those lines, or myth. Particularly, one of the main characters in Chain Gang All-Stars carries a warhammer as her weapon. And the comparison to the folktale of John Henry was constantly at the forefront of my mind. Those of you who are familiar with the story will understand why. Those of you who aren't, this is a great scholarly volume that would have a couple different versions of the John Henry legend in it. If you want something a little more straightforward, there's a lovely picture book version of the story. I think it's by Jerry Pinkney and Ezra Jack Keats. And I highly recommend that to anybody who has any appreciation for folklore or picture books. It's excellent. And then there's also, there are several editions of the Ballad of John Henry. I'm very fond of Pete Seeger's version, which combines two different traditional ballads into one broader story, and features his excellent banjo playing. Finally, for the reading connections, I did watch a couple of interviews with Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah in preparation for talking about this book, and I discovered something that makes a whole lot of sense to me, which is that he was a student of George Saunders. I saw an excellent interview of him talking about Saunders's short story collection Pastoralia, which contains Sea Oak, one of Saunders's best stories, and certainly the one that made me fall in love with his work. And he describes having similar feelings, although for different reasons, when he read it. He also talks about having been Saunders's student around the time that Saunders's only novel to date, Lincoln and the Bardo, came out. This I wanted to talk about a little bit because Lincoln and the Bardo is a very experimental novel. It's a speculative historical fiction. It's about the ghost of Abraham Lincoln's son, who died when he was about 10, interacting with other ghosts in a Washington, D.C. graveyard. And stylistically, it tries some things I've never seen attempted anywhere else. It's often found to be too stylistically innovative to really comprehend, especially on first reading. I solved this problem by listening to the audiobook, which has a cast of over 100 different voices, including Saunders himself, as well as both David and Amy Sedaris, Nick Offerman. God, it's such a good cast. Wonderful audiobook. Highly recommended. But it really pulls out all the stops to paint a broad picture of a cross-section of society at a certain time and place. And that is an ethos that Adjei-Brenyah really brings forth in Chain Gang All-Stars, although it's a very different book with a very different purpose, in most relevant ways. It's Lincoln and the Bardo is, like most of Saunders's work, primarily an act of empathy. He wants to explore human emotion, what makes characters tick. He wants us to feel for them. It is about feelings. And that is praise. I love that about this book. Chain Gang All-Stars is activist fiction. It has a message, and it is a call to action. And they're very different books in that way, but it's clear that some of what he gained from Saunders is this idea of broadness, this idea of the depth of characterization of social relationships, of depicting how a society works as part of depicting how the characters in it work. He also shares Saunders's deeply gentle and empathetic touch with characters, as well as some of the bitter, occasionally bawdy, satirical edge of his wit. It became very clear to me when he mentioned having been his student why I immediately felt at home in his writing. And it's because I've been reading Saunders for a long time and have adored him all that time. I hope this was interesting. I hope you have been convinced to read this book. And I hope I'll hear back from the people who do read it, because the reason I really made this is because I am so eager to discuss this book with everybody I possibly can. I want to talk about it. It's so important. It's on my mind. Um, so tell me what you think, and tell me if you've read Friday Black. Also, tell me what books are on your mind in the same way right now. Maybe we can make a little project of this. Um, Thanks for sticking with me. I've been gone a while, and I'm really glad that everyone who's watching this video is watching it.